Hello, children. How are you all? First of all, we will recollect the previous part of the lesson, collectors. Teachers and students had been on an adventurous walk, and it was raining heavily. At last, they found a house in which Mr. and Mrs. Brown were the occupants. Teachers were offered with the tea and were made to sit in the living room, and children in kitchen. Children were surprised to see the empty kitchen. Slowly, they started noticing strange features in Mrs. Brown. Pete went out of the kitchen and found that the teachers were drugged. Mr. and Mrs. Brown were hissing and clicking. Children had opened the cupboard and found various types of electronic equipments. When they became panicked, Pete and Glenn tried to break the window glass and open the back door, but in vain. Mrs. Brown gets into the kitchen with the orange juice. Children inquire with Mrs. Brown about their doubt. She stated that her husband was a scientist and doors and windows were burglar proof. Moving on to the next part of the lesson. Open your textbook, page number 51. Mrs. Brown, how dare you? After we have taken you in and looked after you, after I have gone to the trouble of getting these drinks for you, the least you can do is to sit quietly and drink them. Pete, I bet they are drugged, just like the tea you gave Mr. Hunt and the others. Mrs. Brown, now just stop that kind of talk. Pete, I saw them. You have got them in the other room drugged. Mrs. Brown, you saw nothing of the sort. They are all chatting to Mr. Brown right now. Carol, ask them to come in here then, so we can see them. Mrs. Brown, certainly not. I'm not dragging them in here just because of a lot of children's silly fantasies. Glenn, well, let's go in there and see them. Mrs. Brown, no, you don't. I'm not going to be ordered about by children. She bars the way through the door. Carol, she can't stop us on her own if we all try to go. Mrs. Brown, all right. I'll go and fetch one of your teachers. Stupid children. She goes out. Moving on to the explanation part. Mrs. Brown angrily shouts at the children that they had been courteous enough to let them in and offer tea to teachers and juice to children. Pete suspects that juice also may be drugged as that of tea. There was a small quarrel between Pete and Mrs. Brown regarding the same. Carol requests Mrs. Brown to let the teachers into the kitchen, for which Mrs. Brown flatly denies and says that she is not ready to listen to children's silly fantasies. Glenn tries to go out of the kitchen, but Mrs. Brown resists and bars the way through the door. Carol gets angry and asks her friends to rush near the door altogether. Seeing children being aggressive, Mrs. Brown goes out to get the teachers. Moving on to the next part. Dawn, see, she's going to bring them. Tracy, they aren't drugged at all. You were trying to scare us. Dawn, you are stupid, Pete. Tracy, it's an ordinary house and they are ordinary people. Dawn, frightening us like that. You are rotten. Pete, I know what I saw. Give us that walking stick, Glenn. Glenn, here you are. As Glenn gives Pete the stick, both Mr. and Mrs. Brown come in. Carol, where is Mr. Hunt? Mr. Brown, he won't be coming, and you had better drink. Pete, don't, don't anybody touch that stuff. Mr. Brown, it'll make no difference. You can't escape anyway. Don and Tracy start shouting at Pete and Glenn that they were lying and trying to scare by saying that Mr. and Mrs. Brown were aliens. Pete asked for walking stick with Glenn to protect themselves. Mr. and Mrs. Brown come in and force children to have the orange juice. On to the next part of the lesson. Wayne, oh no, come on, Glenn, let's get past them. Glenn, right. He and Wayne make a rush for the door. One armed, Mrs. Brown brushes them away. They were sent flying across the kitchen. Mr. Brown, stop that. We don't want any of you damaged. And either of us alone is more than a match for any 5 feeble earth children. Carol, if you try to keep us here, the police will come looking for us. Mr. Brown, will they? They won't find you. You're going away. Tracy, no. Where are you taking us? Mrs. Brown, shall I tell them? Mr. Brown, why not? It might calm them to know there is no avoiding their fate. Mrs. Brown, we are taking you to our home planet. Glenn, home planet? Carol, you're not from Earth. You're aliens? Mr. Brown, exactly. Wayne, but you are human. You look human. Mrs. Brown, we can take on any shape we wish for a time. So can our spaceship. Mr. Brown, at the moment, as you have seen, it looks like an Earth house. Very useful for our mission. Mrs. Brown, in a few moments, we shall convert it to a spaceship again and return to a normal shape. Mr. Brown, so you had better drink. It will make the shock of takeoff easier for you. Tracy, but you mustn't take us. You can't. Mr. Brown, how wrong you are. Wayne, but why us? Why pick on us? Mrs. Brown, you are available. We collect creatures from other worlds like you. Carol, why? What for? Mr. Brown, for experiment and scientific study. You will be useful to us. Pete, oh no, we won't. Moving on to the explanation part. Glenn and Wayne try to rush near the door, but Mrs. Brown brushes them away. Carol pleads to let them go out and also says that police will come in search of them. For which Mr. Brown says that they will be moving away so that nobody could catch them. Mrs. Brown reveals that they are aliens and they are taking to their home planet. Wayne says that they look like normal human beings, for which Mr. Brown says that they, as well as their spaceship, could take any shape as they wished. Carol was eager to know why only they were taken. Mr. Brown says that they take human beings for experiment and scientific study. Pete disagreed with what Mr. Brown had said. Assignment of the day. First one. What suspicion did children have towards Browns? Second. Why were the aliens taking the children and why? I'll continue the next part of the lesson in the next class, children. Thank you. Have a nice day.